Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters with your questers Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
Welcome to episode 175. Today's podcast, we will be discussing all things trollical, and I'm going to do my best Chris Berman impression, the Raiders. If you know who Chris Berman is, we can be friends. If you don't, sorry. So if you have any questions for us, drop us a line at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Till then, when we get your emails, we will talk about the hows and the whys and the whos of raiding that the Crystal Raiders will actually do.
This is going to wrap up our series on the Crystal Raiders and the Highland trollmoots in general. This is such a significant portion of their culture that we needed to address it.
Yeah. We figure if this is the survival guide, the Raiders actually raid, aside from just how they live, but this is their raiding part. So if you're going to survive something, this is the part you really want to survive. So why do the Crystal Raider trollmoots raid? Well, because they have to. Because Jaspree's challenge and all of that jazz, which I think Josh can read better than I can. But otherwise, they raid because all name trolls believe, the Crystal Raider trolls, especially the Highland trolls, believe that all name givers need the troll's moral lesson. If you can't defend it, you can't keep it. Very brief encapsulation.
That is a self-justification for what they do. The other reason that they raid is because their homeland, their territory, where they live, does not have an abundance of resources.
It's a very hard Scrabble existence.
It is a very difficult, isolated, remote, resource-poor environment that they live in, and thus, in order to survive, or thrive, really, they raid to get things that are not available where they live. The fact that they justify it as this is teaching a lesson to those lowlanders that they need to be strong just like we are, and we demonstrate that we're strong by taking their stuff, and if they could defend their stuff, then we would respect them more. There's a lot of self-justification and ethical limboing that's kind of going on with that.
Yeah, there's a lot of tying themselves into knots to justify exactly what they're doing and why.
Well, I don't think that they're tying themselves in knots extensively. It's just that is the cultural background upon which everything is based, dating back centuries for them. And it is the life that they have and the life that they know. And it is the way of trolls, and honor requires them to continue to live that way. It's kind of messed up in its own way.
It is.
There is certainly no lack of hypocrisy or anything like that in troll culture in general. But ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the trolls need stuff, and so they go out and they, for lack of a better term, punch people and take their stuff.
Yes, I was going to say. And here's the what of the raiding. They target lowland communities for mostly grain, produce, dried and fresh, meats, dried and fresh, pottery, salt, cloth, whatever they're low on, like basically a gigantic trek to Costco where they need everything in bulk. And then, so they'll wait until the harvest, maybe when it's dire. So they'll probably wait for like 2 or 3 different seasons. When it's harvest season for produce to be done growing, the drying and storage season. So when they're fermenting things or making jerky, or when just their own trollmoot is in dire straits to go, okay, load up the ship. We got to go now. Got to get still. Those are the three things I could think of. I think maybe you have more ideas.
Yeah, those are pretty well in line with things. It's kind of a shame that troll culture, Highland troll culture, Crystal Raider culture is on some level broken, that the pride and honor of the Highland trolls doesn't allow them so much room to be, for lack of a better term, domestic.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about it in the previous Trolls episode. There are troll arts and crafts and things, but broadly speaking, they don't produce them in enough quantity, so they need to go and rather than do trade, they just steal it. I mean, we talked about how cool the trolls are, but fundamentally there is a problem with them culturally.
Yes.
Where the strength and force of arms and everything that goes along with that is so highly regarded and such an integral part of the way that their culture operates that there are some aspects of their reputation in other parts of Barsave that are well deserved.
Mm-hmm.
They are
Bullies.
aggressive, violent thugs, in a sense, that sail out and prey on the weak and steal things for themselves. The fact that it is what is necessary for them to survive or thrive as a people doesn't necessarily lessen the harm that they cause through what they do.
Yeah. So, because part of their culture is that there's no honor in allowing an opponent to surrender. So when you are raided by the trolls, the Crystal Raiders, they will not parlay. You can't negotiate with them. They will make you fight to keep your stuff. That's part of their honor. That's part of their code. So there's no parlay there. You have to fight them off even a little, but that's just the way they operate.
Yeah, it's curious. I don't recall off the top of my head how this might be addressed or if it's addressed. It would not surprise me if villages or communities in an area that is subject to Sky Raider raids, to Highland Troll raids, put up a sort of token resistance. They have a sort of offering of, okay, here's the stuff that they can take, and we're going to put some guards around it to put up a token resistance to assuage their honor so that they don't get offended and cause even more damage than they already are. And there may be members of Highland troll moots and so forth that sort of recognize that and go along with that play acting, with that ritual, in order to follow the letter of the law when it comes to the way that they operate. So yeah, that's something to potentially keep in mind. Areas that are likely to be hit by raids likely have some experience dealing with them and know how to best cope with whatever the issues are. I imagine that there is probably some concern about what moot might be hitting them.
Yeah.
Because while the different moots do have traditional areas that they raid into, there is plenty of overlap within that area. And I imagine that noticing that a drakkar or two is coming in for a raid and going, oh, good, it's the Stoneclaws, not the Bloodlores. There is probably a certain amount of that happens with lowland communities that are more likely to be preyed upon by the Crystal Raiders.
Yeah. So what you mentioned is not brought up as far as I could discern in the research, but I imagine that I could easily see a community or two, homebrew community, doing exactly that, over-harvesting a little bit, hiding the really good stuff for themselves and leaving, oh, you raided the barn. Oh, shucks. And, they got away with some of our foodstuffs. But once they're gone, they bring out the actual foodstuffs and put it back in the barn. So I can imagine that. I could totally see that happening in something that you or I would completely. So just so everybody knows, that's the why they raid and the what they raid for. Now that that's out of the way, we have 3 basic types of raids that the Crystal Raiders will involve themselves in. They raid other troll moots. Sorry, go ahead.
Before we get into that, it's notable that at least present day, Crystal Raiders typically are not raiding for wealth. They don't really care for coin, silver, gold, anything like that. They certainly appreciate kernels of true elements where they'll raid like fire mining operations and things like that. They will certainly, I imagine, like taking jewelry or other items like that a captain or member of a crew could wear to demonstrate their prowess and show off things that they had taken. But because they are not really a mercantile culture in that sense, they don't really have a whole lot of need for money. And so their raids Well, I imagine they probably wouldn't necessarily turn it down. That's not really what they're after.
Yeah. They're more for the subsistence goods, the necessity versus the pretty falderal. They'll maybe get to as a side bonus thing. But yeah, they're there for the essential.
Yeah, and I mean, luxuries as well.
Oh, certainly.
Strong drink, ale, mead, wine, or whatever. Things that would make their lives more comfortable and enjoyable, but not money for money's sake.
Yes. I mean, to the victor goes the spoils. Whatever they want, but money for money's sake is lower on the list of what they're... No argument. So, the 3 types of raids that they will get into. Raiding other trollmoots, lowland raids, and of course, the Theron. So, how they basically get the raids done, this is always the mechanics that I like as a game master, because if I was ever going to throw a raid at one of my parties, here's how they actually do it. They tend to do something like lightning fast and then withdraw, because they're not made for a sustained battle. Their drakkars are not made for a sustained battle. They're doing most of this hand to hand, or melee weapon, you want to call it. So they tend to approach slowly, quite long, low, swooping passes in their drakkars, and then at the right moment they drop raiders so they all plummet off the ship in multiple waves and passes. So probably strongest fighters first, second strongest fighters second, fourth, and so on, until the boat is ready. Then those drakkars kind of hang out at the perimeter and do long loops around, so that once the fighting is done and the booty is gained, those fighters, those raiders, hop back, they hoof it back to the low-lying drakkars, hop on the ships, and as soon as all members are back, those ships take off again and they can go back to where they came from. So that's kind of the mechanics of how they raid anybody.
Those are the tactics that they employ.
So the second kind of raid are trollmoot raids. Now, the reasons for this usually is for control of some kind of a territory. Maybe they're disputing about something out of the Great Forest, or there's some mountainous land that they butt up against, and so this month it's this moots, and the next month it's the other moots, and they'll argue about and so forth. Possibly control over a river or a spring, things like that. Most of the time, territory. But they like raiding other troll moots because it's against the only other truly worthy foes, other raiders, who know the honor behind it, who know the tactics behind it, and understand why they're doing what they're doing.
In a sense, yeah. You will have sort of these territory clashes, these, for lack of a better term, border conflicts, where moots that are in proximity to each other will come into conflict, typically over what limited resources there are in Crystal Raider territory in the Twilight Peaks. You mentioned the Great Forest. Similar areas probably in the Great Sword Valley that have valuable resources. And then there's probably a secondary aspect of that as well, that you end up with feuds between moots or between individual captains or crews within moots. I think an interesting conflict could come about as a result of raiding vessels from 2 different moots striking at the same target at the same time.
Yes.
Especially when you have things like the caravans that are traveling through the pass between the Dolaris and the Twilight Peaks, and the trade that is taking place between Carafad and the rest of Barsave, and at least pre-Second War, the supply runs that are going between the Triumph and Theron territories. All of those make tempting targets for Sky Raiders, and it could result in multiple crews going after the same target at the same time, which makes things even more chaotic and could result in as much fighting between the trolls as between the trolls and whatever it is that they're trying to hit.
Yes. So, because troll moots raid other troll moots, there is somewhat of a ceremonial aspect to each of these. There's a lot of offerings to Thestonius, and because of the strategy like game of it all, because they know their enemies quite well. I mean, it's like division rivalries in any sports event, period. They understand what it's about, and they understand how to raid this moot versus that moot versus the third moot, and what tactics to use. And so there's, like I said, a somewhat ceremonial aspect to it, because both moots have strict rules of honor, and once the raiding is done, they must recognize must recognize the superiority of the victor, and therefore both moots keep their honor in, because these usually aren't like to the death, but it's just territory dispute, like you said, resources dispute.
But ultimately, yeah, that ceremonial aspect where these conflicts are not to the death makes a lot of sense. If you've got a culture where you can't moderate the conflicts, where you can't resolve the conflicts without slaughtering each other, that is a culture that is ultimately doomed.
Yeah.
Because the raiding aspect of Crystal Raider culture, when you're talking about the lowland raids, is for the survival of the clans, the survival of the moots, the ability to get enough resources to feed and provide for your people. If you are killing each other in conflicts with other moots, or you are severely injuring raiders or warriors from other moots, those are individuals that cannot then go out on raids to the lowlands to provide for the clan. And there's a sort of recognition of, because this is the way we live, this raiding, this conflict is sort of one of our defining cultural characteristics, but we also recognize that practically speaking, we can't be constantly killing each other if we want to be able to continue to do what we do. And so there would be I think depending on the moots, a strong component of ritual and tradition and ceremony that is involved there. And I think despite their reputation, the Bloodlords are probably the most in favor of that. They may hold that the other trolls are lesser because they are weakened by their association with dwarves or their other ways or whatever, because we talked about the Bloodlords quite a number of weeks ago. But that the rules of engagement as a very strongly orthodox aspect of Crystal Raider culture, they probably hold very strongly to those laws and traditions and rules, even if they are unspoken or unwritten, because to do otherwise is to besmirch their honor as the definition of what it means to be a Crystal Raider. And so I think perhaps the violence and bloodthirstiness that goes along with their reputation in the lowlands is not one that is the case when they're fighting other moots. They will be fierce, they will put their all into it, but they recognize the personhood of other Crystal Raiders to an extent that they don't of lowlanders.
Yes. Well, and for Thistonius' sake, since most of them are all about Thistonius, it's more about the conflict than it is bringing the enemy to their knees in subjugation and so forth and so on. It's about just the actual act of being in conflict and seeing who the victor can be.
Yeah.
And to your point, one of their absolute, their biggest points of honor is that no Crystal Raider in any of the Trollmoot will attack a grounded, wounded drakkar that is cowardly and is offensive to all three of the honors, personal, racial, and troll, and clan honor. However, other name givers don't know that rule. And so if there's a grounded drakkar in the lowland, the name givers out there are attacking the grounded drakkar. Yeah, that might not go so well they don't take kindly to that. Take that one kind of personally.
That is in part as well because the drakkar is something that is fundamental to their culture and their honor.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Again, it's recognizing you do not need to kill an enemy to have defeated them. And so a grounded drakkar, a damaged drakkar that is not able to perform its function, we let that go because that is also a way that the moots survive. That's how they send out their raids for other goods. And so there's kind of like a mutually recognized, for lack of a better term, like non-destruction pact, because they recognize that if they were to take advantage of a grounded drakkar, then that same thing could be done to them, and as a result, weaken them and their chief's ability to provide for their clan.
Yeah. They just consider it good sportsmanship. They givers who aren't part of the Trollmoot don't know this rule.
Right.
So I don't quite see it the same. So that takes care of the raids against other Trollmoots. Now, raids against other name givers. These are going to be broken up into little areas, certain things. So mostly when they hit the lowlands, it's the plains north of Utrecht, kind of somewhat to the east, kind of somewhat to the west, not so much the south because that's all Death Sea. So there's plans to raid in there. But the lowland communities, some of them, to Josh's point earlier, have some planned defenses against some raids. They organize militias, they recruit adepts, they offer offerings to Garlen for peace. Do they work? Who knows? But that's what they've kind of tended to employ. And I think Josh has a perfectly fine fourth option. We'll overharvest and kind of make an effort of, this is the stuff you can take. We'll hide the other stuff we don't want so we can survive. But the trollmoots themselves, not that they do a coordinated thing amongst each other, but they kind of stagger their targets so that the frequency is not really to deplete any one village or any one place or any one home, so that, they have an opportunity as well and they can share the love, for lack of a better term.
It's managing your hunting grounds.
Yes.
If you completely deplete your prey, if you completely wipe out the herd, then you're not going to have a herd to
come back to
draw on the next year, the next season. And so there is a lot of practicality that is wrapped up in the way that the Crystal Raiders operate that, again, is wrapped up in a lot of cultural self-justification, things that are probably not actively talked about within the broader culture, but that the successful moots, the successful clans, are the ones that are smart about how they go about it.
Agreed, because they're going to last a whole lot longer, the impulsive raiding. So that's about stationary targets. Farms that don't move and houses that don't move. What about caravan raids? And once I read this section, I just had these images in my head of airships coming down and flying over caravans like the train job in Serenity.
Yes.
That's what triggered in my head. I was like, oh, yes, I can get on board with this one. So this is kind of a new concept as of the Orichalcum Wars, because they didn't used to raid that many caravans because most of the caravans were Theron at the time. So this is a greater challenge due to the hired or skilled caravan guards that are employed. And so what do you get when you get a greater challenge and you win?
More honor.
Greater glory. Yes, bigger honor, greater glory. Most caravans that the Crystal Raiders will raid are, of course, the Therons, and they will almost never pass up a Theron caravan. Because these caravans were mostly to and from Skypoint, across Barsave down to Thera, maybe there's a 4th edition update we should notify people of in case that caravan path is no longer there. Route.
Yeah, the amount of Theron trade, the number of supply runs and caravan runs that the Therons are operating within Barsave is pretty significantly reduced. The Therons are still operating in Barsave. There are still Theron merchants and envoys and organizations that perform trade within Barsave and so operate caravans and other similar mercantile expeditions. They just don't have the strong military presence and tend to fly under the radar a little bit more than they might have in the past, not advertising so strongly their Theronness, although I imagine there certainly would be exceptions, but part of that is simply because they don't have the backup that they did in the past. When you start talking about rank and file Theron citizens and merchants, yes, they are members of a imperialistic, colonialist, brutal, slaving society, but there are regular folks just trying to live their lives and make their living and get by day to day. Practical recognition of this is a situation where my status as a Theron citizen is not one that is going to win me any favors in this part of the world. No. So I'm going to downplay any sort of strong political presence or relations that I might have in that sense. But I think, yeah, travel is dangerous. Not just the Sky Raiders, but there are other bandits and orc nomadic bands outside of Carafad that would still be happy to raid and sack a caravan for whatever resources they could get out of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, there would be defenders and guards that would be hired to protect the investments of the merchants that are running these caravans.
Yes.
They provide a tempting target both because of what they potentially have, but also because of the perception of greater glory and greater honor for successfully raiding something like that. And I suspect that it's not just Theron caravans, but any other merchant caravans that are shipping goods overland from southwestern Barsave into other parts of the province. I mean, I imagine, they are equal opportunity. They would sack a Carafad merchant group just as much as they would a Theron or a Throlic one. This just basically does the opportunity present itself. And I think that traveling within the area that they typically raid, skilled adepts would be in high demand as caravan guards. And there would be, I imagine, as well, notable demand for scouts or illusionists or elementalists or other adepts that would have the ability to help mask or hide a caravan that would be operating in the area so that it does not come to the notice of the Crystal Raiders and get attacked as a result.
Agreed. So part of the methodology that the raiders, so I told you the methodology before about how they just raid in general, other trollmoots and stationary. When they raid a moving target like a caravan, they will actually employ their ship weapon against the guards. So spear throwers, net throwers, ballistas, and so forth, because again, better term, in a more professional, hired, skilled guards than just farmers with, scythes and pitchforks. You're looking at actual, like as you said, possibly magicians there, adepts there, archers, beastmasters, and whatnot. So yeah, they're going to bring out all of their capabilities and all of their offensive weapons. So they will use those before they do their second or third pass to drop the raiders, do the hand-to-hand combat part. So weaken the defenses of the caravan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's also, when we're talking about moving targets, other airships, particularly those performing fire mining operations or things like that, where they are fire mining, elemental air mining, where they're gathering resources that the Crystal Raiders would desire in order to enchant their own airships and build more drakkars.
Oh, yeah.
And so an airship is similar to a merchant caravan in the sense that it is a mobile target and a more desirable one. It's not a case of the ships kind of go up side to side and trade broadsides, although there is no doubt some longer range ship weapons fire that would be involved in what's going on there. It would be a case of trying to swoop in low and have raiders jump over onto the deck. An interesting thing that could be done with airship attacks that is not the case with ground targets, whether caravans or villages or whatever, is that because they are both airborne, you could have the drakkar, the Crystal Raider drakkar, come in above to start off with for the attackers to jump off down onto the deck of the ship.
Yep.
And then it would go around and descend and come back lower. So when they've got the stuff that they're going, they can just jump off the side of the boat down onto the drakkar, ready and waiting there for them.
Exactly.
Being able to take advantage of that third dimension that airships have over traditional land-based combat.
Yeah, or even water-based combat, because very rarely will they pull up alongside and grappling hook the other boat and kind of tether them together so they can jump sideways. They really do prefer the whole downstrike maneuver, to Josh's point, and then downstrike to yes, changing in altitude to that's caravan. And just so everybody knows, this is one of the little details I love about Earthdawn, where they laced in some trollmoots will pay spies and informants and sometimes wandering adventurers for caravan information as to where it's going to be, when it's going to leave, what kind of cargo they're transporting. And some moots won't pay for spies, but they will actually scout their own information. So sometimes you might run across a lone troll from the Highlands down in the lowlands who's scouting out, a caravan trade route by land, just so you know.
That is a great use for any coin that they might come across, because that is something that would be useful, that they could pass that on to their spies and actually pay them off that way.
Yeah.
So there is a potential use for that if you've got clans or moots that are willing to use that tactic.
Exactly. And here's another opportunity for a 4th edition update to Josh. Omasu of the Overland Trading Company intended, this is a little while ago, to negotiate an agreement with the Crystal Raiders for immunity from raiding for his caravans and those of his allies, in return for providing specific information on the scheduled contents of caravans belonging to the Therons and their allies in Vivane and elsewhere. Well, Skypoint and Vivane,
Right. This is one of the things that was being set up for what would have been the Second Theron War supplements and events from the 1st edition run, setting that up as a source of conflict as a plot device, and certainly something that would be interesting. The fact that Omasu's caravans, the caravans of the Overland Trading Company, were a way by which the Life Rock Rebellion was transporting information and scouting and learning about what's going on and so forth. And the desire to continue to build that Barsavian alliance to go up against the Therans as the post-Triumph, pre-Second War era was going on is absolutely something that would be the case. Whether that would hold after the war was over and the Therans were largely driven out, hasn't really been anything or any need for us to detail that to any extent. But that's certainly something that you might want to consider if you are working on a game that is set in that sort of present day 4th edition era after the Therans have been driven out.
Yeah. Wanted to make sure we got an update for that one because this book is prior to the 4th edition. Raids over stationary targets on land, raids over moving targets on land, a little bit on targets in the air, so Theran air caravan. What about raids over water? Because we did do a whole section on the Serpent River a long, long time. The Crystal Raiders rarely raid, that's a term of phrase, because most parts of the Serpent are too far away. But this is getting more popular, especially since the Second Theran War, probably. Some moots raid the South Reach, mostly because House Contention is linked to the Theran trades and boats and so forth and so on. Mountain trolls are poor swimmers, if they can swim at all, which is why it's really rare for them to raid, because eventually they're probably going to get pushed overboard by the very capable Tuskrang fighters, and drowning is a very dishonorable death.
Yeah.
But the reason they can raid riverboats is because most riverboats, significant size, to have fire cannons to point upwards. And so they just come straight over the riverboat themselves and just drop down either on ropes or they jump. But depending upon the riverboat, Crystal Raiders will use their shipborne weapons again because riverboats have fire cannons. And so at this point, it's just trading blows like pirate ships of old. Then they will descend on deck for their hand-to-hand combat and all the spoils they can possibly get. Hopefully not getting pushed into...
Yeah. The one advantage... I don't know, I would actually say it's an advantage, but the one positive thing is that because of the way that a drakkar is designed, it is capable of landing in water if it needs to. I mean, it's still shaped like a boat and therefore would behave like a boat. It's probably somewhat awkward in the water because it's not enchanted to do so, but it looks like a boat. It would float.
Yeah.
Assuming you don't put holes in the hull or anything like that where it would sink. But there is that capability where, if need be, the drakkar could beach itself in a body of water.
It's so good. I just can imagine that the Crystal Raiders are used to smooth sailing, maybe some air turbulence a little bit, but choppy river travel might throw their sea legs for a loop a little bit. So I would imagine a couple of dexterity rolls just to see if they can handle.
And you mentioned this earlier, just the image of a Tuskrang riverboat going up against a Sky Raider drakkar.
Oh, yeah.
Is just a really, really cool image.
Yes. I want to see it on screen. I don't care if it's animated or in live action. I don't care.
So despite the fact that it doesn't happen a lot, it's really, really cool.
Somebody draw that for me. Send it in. I don't know. Anyway, here's the thing about Crystal Raiders raiding Tuskrang riverboats is... Since the Scourge, many Tuskrang have been taken as Niwats, which is not necessarily good for the Tuskrang. It's kind of curbed itself a little bit over the last few years because the Crystal Raiders realize that the barren, dry landscape that they're taking the Tuskrang to is downright inhospitable for them. They're kind of curbing that practice a little bit.
Yeah. And as I seem to recall in first edition, Tuskrang couldn't be Sky Raiders.
I'd have to take a look.
I would have to take a look at that as well. I could be mistaken.
I knew they couldn't be Beastmaster.
Right.
But Sky Raiders, again, I never had anybody play a Sky Raider, so I didn't have to look them up all that often. So that was one of those I kind of forgot about that discipline for many, many years.
Oh, no. Tuskrang could be Sky Raiders. Elf, Obsidian, and Windling were the restrictions for Sky Raider.
Gotcha. Fair.
Elves because they were particularly frail, relatively speaking. Obsidian because they don't like being in the sky, in the
don't
air.
Like having their feet off the ground.
They don't like their feet off the ground. And Windlings because Windlings. Again, also very small, not particularly strong or aggressive in that sense. And then there's just the general Highland troll antipathy towards windlings
to begin with
in the first place because of the massive cultural differences between them.
Yeah, agreed.
That the Sky Raiders, the traditional Highland trolls, take things to a certain extent very seriously, and windlings, generally speaking, don't.
Well stated.
The windlings, because of their cultural heritage, tend to behave towards others in a way that pretty easily insults Highland troll honor.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Highland trolls get upset about it amuses windlings to no end. And so they do it even more, and just kind of setting up a vicious cycle. Although, again, the racial restrictions have been done away with in 4th edition.
Yeah.
Those would be pretty rare examples that you would see in terms of combinations.
Fair enough. So that pretty much takes care of most of the notes I have. The only other thing I want to tack on about the Crystal Raiders raiding Theron airship caravan, that's a sentence. Most of those ships, if the Crystal Raiders win, they will confiscate those ships, and if they can't keep them in repair, which most of them, they will therefore cripple them and hide them in their caves so that the Therons can't use them. Since the Crystal Raider drakkars are meant for speed and not necessarily durability, that they can't really go up against the stone airships one-on-one. So they tend to employ multiple ship strategies. So whatever troll moot or
swarm tactics.
Yeah, swarm tactic. So whatever troll moot or plural troll moots will do against the Theron ship, those are a whole different set of tactics. So as you've noticed, they have tactics for stationary targets, tactics for airship targets, tactics for riverboat targets. They will employ what they need to win because they're all about the conflict and the win.
Yep. And then there's the added feud long-standing with the Theron Empire in general because of the original Battle of Sky Point. The opportunity to strike at Theron holdings, especially a mining vedette or something like that, which is a ship that the trolls would be able to take on reasonably well, which is why Theron mining operations, at least back in the day, typically would have military vessels of some sort as an escort nearby in order to protect against such things.
Or, as I say in shorthand, because reasons.
Yeah.
But your summation is a whole lot better than mine. That's what I've got for surviving Crystal Raider airship strategies when they come raiding wherever your party happens to be. Guarding a caravan, wandering through the woods, near a farm, whatever.
That is a useful bunch of information to have as a game master in terms of understanding how this group might come into play if you are involving them in an adventure, either as a primary antagonist or ally or complication that comes up in the course of something else. Knowing how they operate can be particularly handy in terms of your prep and understanding of what might happen when the player characters get involved.
Yeah.
I would agree. If there is anything that any of our listeners would like us to revisit or address in more depth, or something that we skipped that comes to mind, feel free to send us an email, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We're always happy to get feedback and questions and suggestions and commentary from our listeners. 175 episodes, Dan.
Yeah. How'd we get here?
1 week at a time.
Absolutely.
There will come a point where we have exhausted just about everything, but it's not coming up in the immediate future.
No, we're looking well past 200 here.
Yeah.
We're going to get there. Absolutely so. So, folks, do not attack Drakkar for your legend.
Good night, everybody.